there's still the element of money distribution that has not been solved in any of these developed nations, especially because they're still operating on the last time that they actually made any sort of socialization initiatives like Social Security in America, for example. That was a fucking 100 years ago. Holy, that is so crazy. Let's do How China Plans to Become a Rich Country by Caspian Report.
Worth over $150 million were brought down in a matter of seconds. They weren't structurally unsafe or anything like that. Allegedly, they were in the way of a 5% GDP target. That moment says a lot about how China has chased growth for decades. Build fast, build big, and worry about purpose later. But now, that model is running out of steam, and Beijing wants to do things differently. It is investing in industries like AI, robotics, and smart devices to improve how its people live and work. From 2025 to 2035, the country expects to grow at 5% annually. If that holds, its GDP per capita will double from 2020 levels. In effect, Beijing will join the rich club by 2035. That's been China's dream for more than a century. But there is a slight problem. GDP growth is not always productive growth. You can build a highway, tear it down, rebuild it exactly as before, tear it down again, and do this over and over, and it will all register as economic growth. Construction or destruction, GDP doesn't care what the activity is. It just counts the money. This loophole isn't unique to China, but local officials there have used it to hit their GDP targets. That's why you'll sometimes see perfectly good buildings demolished. But at the end of the day, none of this is productive growth. It's not real. It doesn't benefit the public in the long run. And so, now that China's economy is maturing, the time has come to move up the ladder and rely on the Chinese consumer for growth. In the next decade, Beijing aims to rewire its economy so that household consumption, not state-driven investment, becomes the main driver of growth. However,
this is a good take. Exactly. This is a good article on China's so-called low-altitude economy, which is a development priority set by the government. Flying cars, delivery drones, etc. It feels a bit like EVs in the beginning of the 2010s, set as a priority sector by the government, but no one really paid any attention to it until a decade later when the West realized it was years behind. I hear virtually no one speak about the low-altitude economy except in China, and a decade from now, we'll see Chinese skies scatter with tens of millions of drones and flying cars, and we'll be like, wait, when did this happen? Well, it's starting to happen now, and we better be paying attention. And Jeet here says, to put this in terms that American wonks can understand, China has a robust abundance agenda. When you came back from your 9/11, you did the P.O. box and received that book, by the way.
The Communist Manifesto.
30th of August, 2019. That's when I got it. Hello, Hasan. I went from disliking you to actually hearing out your perspective to further my perspective. While I still disagree with you, since I still believe in some of the best aspects of the West, what happened to you recently was absolutely disgusting. Oh, thanks for having your mind changed, chatter. It's always important to entertain that little curiosity that you have in your mind that causes you to venture further. Stick around. You will probably find that you agree with a lot more of what I have to say than you actually disagree with.
Going from a production-based model to a consumption-based
I've been here for 5 years and I still hate him. And then you can have the attitude as well.
Model is perhaps the most complicated phase in becoming a high-income country. It's easier to build a machine than it is to convince people to use it. We live in a world where technology and AI are reshaping geopolitics. As automation grows and jobs are at risk, keeping up isn't just an advantage, it's a necessity. That's where today's sponsor, Outskill, comes in. They have this 2-day AI training that takes you from...
Jesus Christ, dude, come on, Caspian Report. AI training?
In 2023, China's GDP per capita was $12,600, which is just below the World Bank's high income threshold of $13,800. However, that threshold is expected to rise steadily, reaching 15,700 by 2028 and 18,200 by 2035. If China misses its 5% growth target, it risks not only falling short of the rich club, but also locking itself in the middle income trap, with no easy way out. Even so, GDP alone overlooks a key component of true wealth: consumerism. To grow, an economy has to produce, sell, and build. Money has to circulate in the market. Chinese officials have long debated shifting the economy from investment and exports to consumer spending. China is a massive market after all. Its population tops North America and the EU combined. But boosting domestic consumption has added urgency now because of US tariffs. You see, up until now, China has relied on exports and construction to fuel economic growth. But there's only so much you can build or sell. Germany, India, Japan, and others want to produce and sell stuff too. And with geopolitical uncertainties...
Thoughts on this vid? It seems really capitalistic minded and stupid. I think a lot of the China narratives, like anytime someone analyzes China from the West, they literally look at it from a dogmatic perspective. They look at it from a capitalist dogmatic perspective, and therefore I think they sometimes end up missing the mark. Having said that, in spite of being GDP brained, yes, there are absolutely like some of the things that he's mentioning in terms of like China moving into domestic consumption is not wrong. That is definitely a priority for them in order to become more self-sustaining. Like, reading too hard into GDP as like the most valuable metric of success or failure aside, I think looking at China's interests as far as like focusing on internal consumption or even the creation of secondary markets is correct.
Growing, many advanced economies are putting up barriers to protect their own respective industries.
Yeah, see, it's not capitalistic minded. China's needs to shift from investment to consumption is the number one issue facing China right now. It's not about capitalism, it's about economic reality. I don't disagree with you on that. Yes, China's reliance on construction has been unsustainable and the bubble is burst and the government is shifting. Yeah. I agree. Like, I think that this is a shifting priority for the Chinese state. That is true.
While at the same time diversifying supply chains away from China. Essentially, globalization is taking a step back, and it's all coming at the expense of Beijing. This trend makes hitting 5% GDP all the more difficult, and it falls to the Chinese consumer to pick up the tab. However, as of now, only about 39% of China's GDP comes from household consumption. That's low. In fact, it's the lowest of any major economy. In the United States, consumption accounts for 68% of GDP. In Britain, 62%. In Brazil, 63%. In South Africa, 67%. And in Japan, 53%. For reference, household consumption reflects how much of the economy is driven by consumer spending. Globally, the average ranges between 60 and 70%. China, however, ranks among the bottom 15 globally. That's because the average Chinese household saves more than 30% of its income, while in the United States, it's around 9%. China's high saving rate is rooted in its culture and history. Having endured centuries of hardship, the national mindset is ingrained with a deep sense of caution. So saving isn't just a habit, it's almost instinctive. And while excessive spending, as in the United States, can cause problems, spending too little can also hamper real economic growth. Consumerism in China took a nosedive after draconian COVID-19 lockdowns. Households never fully recovered and grew more frugal. Even after lockdown restrictions were fully lifted in late 2022, consumer confidence plummeted, and people started saving at a higher rate than before the pandemic. What's more, due to the instability in Chinese real estate, most of these savings...
I don't know how much of this, like, the Chinese save too much and they don't have a debt-based economy is valid. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I do hear this all the time from Western analysts, though, which is that the Chinese citizens do not spend as much and they save way too much, as opposed to like American consumers that are under an insane amount of debt at all points, but they also spend a lot.
Were and are channeled to bank deposits and other financial assets rather than new homes. So essentially, Chinese households have savings and decent jobs, but after the lockdowns, they stopped spending. Not because they can't, but because they're afraid of what comes next. As a result, China is seeing a totally different financial crisis than in the West. While America is struggling with post-COVID inflation, China is experiencing deflation. This means the rate of inflation dips below zero and prices decrease. In the past 2 years, prices have fallen for 18 months in a row. And while that may seem like a good thing at first, persistent deflation can be more harmful than inflation. When people expect prices to keep dropping, they often delay spending, hoping to get a better deal later. Businesses then cut prices to attract buyers. But the more this happens, the less money they make. Eventually, economic momentum grinds to a halt, which can lead to layoffs or closures.
Yeah, I don't. This is okay. Listen, this is what I mean when I say like this is a dogmatic approach, because when you have a command economy, you can structure it in a way where you can avoid these sorts of problems. Because if money is fake, ultimately the government can change its priorities in a way that like the U.S. Market fundamentalist approach will not be able to deal with. Because if the only tools you have at your disposal in Western liberal capitalist, in air quotes, democracies is monetary or fiscal policy, and you don't have any way of like actually, you don't have any way of dealing with these issues with a centralized approach beyond that, and that fiscal policy only happens at the legislative level, and that the legislature is completely destroyed, as it is in the United States of America. The only tool in your tool belt is monetary policy. You have a very money is fake, a millionaire. I mean, it is. It's true. That doesn't mean that like without it you die. That is the case.
At the same time, debts become harder to pay off because the value of money increases, but the amount owed stays the same. As spending slows, businesses struggle, people lose jobs, and the economy shrinks, creating a vicious cycle that's much harder to fix than moderate inflation. China desperately needs to avoid this scenario. To unlock its massive consumer spending potential, Beijing has come up with an action plan. In his yearly report to Parliament, China's Prime Minister listed 3 ways to get people to spend more. Give them more money to spend, encourage them to save less, and move money from people who save it to people who spend it. In line with those 3 principles, the same plan also promises to increase local minimum wages, increase healthcare subsidies and pensions, improve paid leave, expand childcare relief, develop housing affordability, and give workers more time off to shop and spend their money. All told, these additional fiscal stimuli are worth 2% of GDP. China clearly views.
Look, Cloud District Enjoyer says there's political repression in China. Hasan would say that too. Of course, I agree with that. But I think it is the type of political repression that exists in China that makes it more, in some ways, makes it more resistance to like international forces of pressure. But it's also that exact same political repression that is apparent that makes China more interested in ensuring stability and makes China more invested in listening to it makes China more invested in making sure that people are not angry and resentful. Because just as it was with the monarchies, there's only so much political instability that a monarchy can withstand until people start engaging in the act of rebellion. And I think that this is one of the aspects of the Chinese form of governance, where people understand that they have limitations to what they can say and what they can't say, or limitations of what they can and can't do. But that creates an environment where if there's too much pressure on a particular in a particular case, like, they will end up protesting in a way that could potentially break the entire system. I think the zero COVID lockdowns were a perfect example of this, where it wasn't the heavy-handed approach that the government took necessarily, but it was the lack of freedom that people had, or the lack of transparency in terms of like when you could actually get out of the quarantine structure if someone were found to have COVID in your apartment complex. That actually created a lot of anger and resentment. And the government had to immediately respond to that pressure, because once that pressure builds up to a point where people are protesting in the streets in a place like China, that is significantly more dangerous for the continuation of the Chinese government. As opposed to in America, you have endless amounts of protests, and then there's no response from the government whatsoever, because they can just like feed you a healthy diet of treats and you'll shut the fuck up and forget. It's the fake democratic process that is designed by liberal democracies that makes people that blinds people to the fact that there is no real democratic process whatsoever. A great example of this is obviously Israel, right? Not to always bring it back to that, but or another great example of this is healthcare. Like, there are so many issues in Western liberal capitalist democracies, and yet regardless of the resentment that people feel towards certain things, the government behaves in an inherently undemocratic manner, and people still go out and protest and fuck shit up, and then nothing changes, because Western liberal capitalist democracies have incredible tools at their disposal in terms of consumption, in terms of like at least marginally improving people's living standards, that they can just whip out and sedate the masses. I would go so far as to say the four-year election cycle is another great example of the pressure valve that the government has. It's obviously hard. It's obviously changing a little bit, because like the duopoly that we have has made it so that people are becoming more aware of the illusion of democracy. But ultimately, I think regardless of the anger and resentment that people feel, regardless of the instability that people experience, that pressure valve is still very important. Because every 4 years, that pressure valve releases, and then you feel like you've made some kind of change. Now, of course, the number of people that feel like they're contributing to this real change is smaller and smaller every election cycle.
Views household spending as key to becoming a high-income country. But there's a catch. China may be too old to get rich. Its population is shrinking, with birth rates falling for 3 straight years. If the birth rate stays at 1.0, China's population could shrink to around 760 million by 2100, according to the UN. The high estimate is 1.1 billion, the low is 480 million, but 760 million is the most likely. Either way, this demographic transformation will be China's greatest challenge in the years ahead. It will fundamentally change the country as we know it. According to the World Health Organization, a country's population is considered aging when more than 7% of its people are 65 years or older. China reached that milestone in 1998, and its elderly segment now makes up at least 14% of the population. In the coming years, China's elderly share will grow unabated, which will affect production, consumption, entrepreneurship, and innovation, all chipping away at China's economic momentum and drive. Countries with younger populations, such as Japan in the 1950s and South Korea in the 1960s, experienced rapid economic growth thanks to large working-age populations. But as their populations aged and the labor pool diminished, growth slowed sharply. These two charts show what that process looked like in the case of Japan and South Korea. In both economies, the GDP per capita peaked owing to their young populations. The increase and decrease you're seeing correlates with the active workforce, and this very same demographic principle is true in all advanced economies. China became the world's factory precisely because it had an average of 23.4 million births per year from 1962 to 1990. That number of births now sits at 11.8 million for 2020 and is likely even lower today. China's demographic crisis is reminiscent of what happened in other aging societies. In 2023, China's median age was the same as Japan's in 1995 and Germany's in 2000, while its elderly population matched Japan's in 1996 and Germany's in 1995. What followed in the decades after is that Japan's economy stagnated, while Germany's grew modestly thanks to an influx of immigrants. The point is that the lower the workforce and the higher the elderly population, the more...
Yeah, I mean, China is much better off in comparison to every developed Western nation on this front. But this is a problem for every developed country, because when you have a developed country, you have a lot of older people because they don't die. Developed nations have better medicine and better healthcare outcomes implies that more people are surviving childbirth, more kids are able to become adults, and more adults are able to become retirees, and then they don't die, but they are no longer productive. In the past, when in the past, like, the most productive age group kept constantly increasing because there was need for farm hands, there was need for labor, there was less education around sex ed. People were just like fucking and breeding like rabbits, and therefore there were more productive individuals. So much so that you could like literally kill people in wars, in endless wars, and you would still have enough people to maintain a healthy industrial base. Now you just have too many old people, and they're not dying, and they're not productive forces. They're not a part of the productive forces. They're just like, what are you supposed to do? You're old. And this is a problem that no developed nation state has been able to solve, partially because the overwhelming majority, if not damn near entirety of the developed nation states, are capitalist. The importance of maintaining a healthy base of a productive population is especially important under capitalism. From what I understand, the leadership in China isn't too worried about the demographics just yet, since there's a huge rural population that's being urbanized. Obviously, there is an issue if like the entire planet, the global south will carry the planet in terms of the booming population numbers. But if the entire planet was technically developed like the United States of America is, where I believe the elderly population number is just like increasing, and the population growth is either stagnant or diminishing, like in places like Japan, then there would be a genuine issue unless we had full automation. But even in that process, even if we had full automation, there's still a distribution of money that would favor the select few capital owners, and it would cause the now overwhelming majority of unproductive elderly who can't even take care of themselves to die in dire conditions of poverty. So there's still the element of money distribution that has not been solved in any of these developed nations, especially because they're still operating on the last time that they actually made any sort of socialization initiatives like Social Security in America, for example. That was a fucking 100 years ago. We're still carrying on the last time. Like the thing that's holding this goddamn country together as it stands currently is literally socialization initiatives that took place 100 years ago. Okay? Think about how insane that is. That is insane. That is just like a truly devolving economy. There's a truly horrible, self-defeating, suicidal attitude that many liberal countries have, many Western liberal democracies have. What is this? Everyone should apologize to Vanessa Hudgens. I was hoping COVID would have wrecked the boomers. Found Vanessa Hudgens' account.
More difficult it becomes to attain economic growth. In fact, after the 15%.
What is this? Do mention that population carrying capacity arguments have been debunked constantly. Chatters are still mentioning this for no reason. World population will balance out at 9 billion and plateau. Food and water wise, we are actually pretty set. Still, environmental damage is a problem due to capitalistic expansion.
Elderly milestone, major economies have consistently struggled to grow more than 4% of GDP for more than a decade. What China is trying to do is not impossible, but improbable. Beijing's solution to its aging population is innovation. It is investing heavily in AI and robotics to offset the economic drag of its elderly demographic. However, this is
like if you were to close your eyes and not even think, even for a brief moment, about profit seeking, and you actually were to entertain real global problems that face humanity, okay, without being shackled by dogmatic capitalist thought, the way to address a lot of these issues would require spending a shit ton of money in research and development to ensure that there is no more necessity for a large base of productive forces, given that in 300 years from now the population is going to look a lot older. They're going to keep surviving, even if our bodies keep diminishing and atrophying. I think that a big part of that upkeep would probably require like exoskeletons and things of that nature to keep people upright, standing, walking. There would be a lot of necessary technological aids that allow you to continue living as though you're in your 20s or 30s. And then also on top of that, you would need to build this cyberpunk vision where most of the commodity production is relegated to automation, automated labor. But even then, there's still the distribution of wealth problem. That is essentially where we're at. With no current ability to reverse birth rate declines, we will need an equitable way to reduce our reliance on human labor and promote automation. But in the current global economy, I'm not sure how we do it equitably. Yes, there's that problem. And then the other problem is obviously anthropogenic climate change, like the impact of carbon emissions and human production on climate change, making the planet unsustainable in general. At least like the areas where life could sustain in the past will no longer be sustainable. We're already seeing that. We're already seeing climate refugees and migration patterns born out of agricultural output being completely destroyed in certain areas. Latin America to North American migration patterns is a big part of this. We still have no interest in solving these problems in a holistic manner. So I don't know. I don't know where we go. It's not an aging population. It's life expectancy increasing. Yes. But a big part of the life expectancy increasing is what I just told you. marvels of modern medicine. I guess RFK Jr. is reversing that by taking this anti-medicine stance at the HHS. He is taken up the issue. He's solving it personally by reversing the gains made by advancements in modern medicine. Like, life expectancy comes from not just the fact that people are like living longer lives. That certainly plays a role in this. But a big part of the life expectancy numbers comes from children not dying, or children surviving into adolescence, and like adults not dying in the workplace, for example. Like OSHA regulations play a role in life expectancy numbers going up. Medicine plays a major role. Vaccines play a major role in life expectancy going up. Then there's also the other, like I said, there's also the other problem of like what to do with the elderly when their mental capacity diminishes, what to do with the elderly when they can't help themselves, who is going to help them, is that also going to be automated? Right now, we just warehouse the elderly basically in some of the most exploitative, the most predatory industries in the United States of America. And we don't even like think about it, or we don't even talk about it. I'm not talking about warehousing them in Congress, dude. I'm talking about like elderly care and palliative care in facilities that are horrible. Because again, they are also working on the profit motive. The elderly is the only generation that has any wealth to begin with. And these industries are basically farming them for all of the wealth that they have, because all the wealth is captured in the hands of the elderly who don't really do much. Life expectancy is currently going down, though. The problem for the world right now isn't necessarily that people are too old, but there are too many old people with not enough young people to care for them and the rest of the world. Yeah, no, I agree. That's what I'm saying, is that, like, what do you do when everyone's old? Who's going to take care of the elderly? Is that also going to be automated? Or is there going to be, even if there are like exoskeletons that allow you to walk around as though you were still 30 years old, what do you do when your brain capacity is diminished as well? Because, you know, we have a finite amount on this planet, and once you reach a certain point in your life, at least there isn't much you can do to fix this, you know? Look at Brandon.
Uncharted territory. It's never been done before. Sure, innovation may buy time, but it won't replace demand. AI and robots don't consume like people do. They consume electricity, but that doesn't drive demand in the economy the way human spending does. All things considered, China stands at a crossroads. For decades, it grew by building for the world. Now, it must learn to build for itself. That shift from producer to consumer, from quantity to quality, requires more than just economic policy. It calls for a complete rethinking of how people in China work, spend, and live. It's a change that won't happen overnight. But if...
Okay. God damn, dude. Holy shit.